Why did the whole town stay silent for 20 years, until a boy pointed at the well? A tale of buried truth. Have you ever heard a child say something that sent shivers down your spine? Not silly jokes. Not sweet little imaginary tales. But something spoken with calm certainty, as if a truth had been soaking in silence for far too long, waiting for one careless moment to rise up and shake your very soul. That's how it all began. Benjamin was only 4 years old when the Lane family adopted him. A frail little boy, with almost white blonde hair and large, quiet eyes that seemed like they'd lived through 2 lifetimes before entering that house. He didn't cry, didn't whine, didn't scream, only silence, the kind that carries questions no one dares to answer. One chilly December afternoon, wind swept across the low hills of Richfield, slipping through every crack of the old house. Elena was folding towels in the hallway when she heard something murmuring behind Benjamin's bedroom door. She thought he was dreaming. But then the voice came through clear and sharp, like a knife through the air. "My mom is in the well." Elena froze. The towel slipped from her hands. Her heart clenched. A wave of cold rushed down her spine. Never, not once, had the boy ever mentioned his birth mother. And now, it wasn't a cry, not a nightmare. It was a statement. Firm. As if it were just another fact of the world. "In the well, it's cold. Mom says it's dark down there," Benjamin continued, his voice whispering as if it hovered between 2 worlds. Elena swallowed hard. After all the prayers, after years of infertility and sorrow, she finally had a child, so why did everything start to crack at the very moment that should have felt like peace? She told her husband Gregorio later that night, while they sat at the dinner table, dim yellow light glowing above them. Gregorio just scoffed, brushing breadcrumbs from his sleeve. "He's just imagining things. You spoil him too much, Elena. He's only 4. But his voice was colder than the wind outside. "Greg. I don't think it was imagination." He was so sure. Like, he'd seen it. "Then teach him better. Teach him to be quiet. You think I got this far in life by listening to ghost whispers?" Gregorio raised an eyebrow, eyes sharp like blades. Elena said nothing. It wasn't the first time he'd spoken like that. But that night, when she went back to Benjamin's room and saw him sitting by the window, forehead resting against the glass, staring out toward the back where the well sat, still and silent like a curse, she saw something different. Not the fear of a child, but something like longing. As if he were listening to someone calling his name on the wind. The next day, while tidying the living room, Elena stumbled upon a crayon drawing wedged between the sofa cushions. Sloppy, childlike but eerily vivid. A stone circle, clearly a well, and inside, a woman with her arms reaching upward, long black hair hanging down, no mouth, only wide, pleading eyes. Elena shuddered. She showed it to Gregorio, hoping to share the unease. But he just snorted and tore the paper in 2. "Stop feeding into it. That woman gave up everything. We gave the boy a name and a home. That's enough." But he didn't meet her eyes when he said it. Gregorio Lane, man of discipline, of silence, of wordless dinners and perfectly pressed shirts, never looked straight at her when the past came up. And this time was no different. In the nights that followed, Benjamin kept whispering in his sleep. About a woman in a blue dress, with no mouth, cold, trapped in the well. He kept drawing her over and over until there was no blank paper left. And the well in the yard, the one Gregorio had once sealed with concrete, sat still. But it was waiting. Waiting for someone to tap on its silent skin. Elena began to feel afraid. Not of ghosts, but afraid that the boy might be telling the truth. The well had always been something unspoken. It had been there before the Lane family moved in. Hidden beneath an old oak tree, moss blanketing its concrete lid, wild vines creeping over like nature's way of tightening the past shut. Elena once suggested tearing it down, but Gregorio dismissed the idea. Don't bother. Whatever's down there, let it stay. But since Benjamin arrived, the well felt alive again. Not that it made sounds or moved, but somehow, it pulled the boy's gaze toward it. On breezy afternoons, he'd sit by the window, tracing faint circles on the glass. He didn't say much, but when the wind howled through the cracks, he'd close his eyes. Listening. Who are you listening to? Elena asked once, her voice barely louder than the wind. Benjamin didn't respond right away. He opened his eyes and turned to her with that same faraway, heavy stare she'd seen the day they brought him home. She sings, but not with words. Like the wind. Elena stiffened. She remembered the whisper that night, "My mom is in the well." She had hoped it was just a nightmare. But the boy remained certain. Unshaken. No defiance, just a simple telling of an old memory. Then one day, while cleaning the couch again, she found another drawing hidden deep under a cushion. The same woman in the blue dress. But this time, her arms weren't raised in fear, but in welcome. And from the edge of the gray background, a faint yellow glow filtered downward like someone had cracked open the sky to let light into the bottom of the well. Elena touched the drawing gently. She didn't know why, but her chest ached like she too had once left someone in a dark place, without a final embrace. That day was bitterly cold. No snow, just wind and dampness that clung to the bones. Elena was kneading dough in the kitchen when she heard the back door creak open. Her heart clenched. She rushed out and there was Benjamin, barefoot, standing beside the well. His hand rested on the concrete lid, eyes closed. Not trembling. Not screaming. Peaceful as if talking to someone who had always loved him from the other side. "What are you doing, sweetheart?" Elena whispered, her voice strained. Benjamin turned, smiling faintly. "Last night, she sang to me. Told me not to be afraid. Told me my real name is Rosa Maria." Time stopped. "She said my real mom smelled like lavender, had hair like yours, and a voice soft as flower." His tone was oddly calm. When Gregorio found out, he was furious. Dragged the boy inside, washed his feet with cold water, shouting, "Enough. You should be grateful. We saved you from living like a dog." Benjamin didn't cry. He just looked at Gregorio not with anger, but with a calm that chilled the room and softly said, "You know where she is." Gregorio slapped him. Elena froze. Not because of the slap, but because of what followed. Silence. No crying. Benjamin just stood there, as if the slap wasn't for his body but for the truth, the memory, the instinct no one had ever acknowledged. From that night on, Elena began to change. She no longer folded towels perfectly. She forgot to water the plants on time. The sofa cushions went unswitched. Instead, she listened. To the wind. To the sighs of the house. To the dreams where the woman in the blue dress stood by the well, waving, voiceless. Benjamin grew quieter. But the drawings kept coming more vivid each day. Still the same woman, same shimmering blue dress, but now, her eyes seemed to be pleading for someone to believe. Elena no longer believed this was imagination. She believed it was memory. One night, she found the boy curled beneath the kitchen table, holding a handkerchief that smelled faintly of lavender. "She's cold," he whispered. "But she said I'm brave. Even when I'm scared." "What do you call her?" Benjamin held out a new drawing. In it, the woman smiled for the first time. Though she had no mouth, her eyes finally held peace. At the corner of the paper, in shaky little letters, "Rosie." Elena broke down crying. She had never believed in spirits. But now, she could no longer deny it. Something wanted to be heard. And this child was its voice. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She sat alone in the kitchen, yellow light casting shadows over a flour-dusted table. In front of her, a worn handkerchief still held the faint trace of lavender, the scent the boy called real mom. She felt like a piece of fabric unraveling thread by fragile thread. Her peace was gone. Something had been hidden. And maybe, she had helped bury it even unknowingly. Gregorio always told her not to think too much. But tonight, when she looked into Benjamin's eyes, not the eyes of a child, she understood. The truth can't stay buried in silence forever. The next morning, after Gregorio left for work, Elena quietly opened the drawer where he kept his cufflinks. She knew the little silver key lay beneath the silk cloth from 1989. She had folded it herself. With trembling hands, she unlocked the deepest drawer in Gregorio's office, the one he had forbidden her to touch. And there, between neatly stacked financial papers, was an old photograph, film processed, the color faded. A woman in a sea green dress, hands gently resting on her pregnant belly. Loose hair, a faint, sorrowful smile. And in the background, Gregorio. His face blurry, but his stance unmistakable. On the back, in neat blue ink, Rosa María Quiñones, summer 1999. Elena's heart clenched. 1999, the year Benjamin was born. She collapsed into a chair, the photo trembling in her hand. All the old questions came rushing back at once. Why had Gregorio hidden this photo? Why did he seal the well right after they adopted Benjamin? And why did Rosa Maria's eyes look exactly like the ones in Benjamin's drawings? She stood up and walked to the back door. Outside, the well lay still beneath the cold winter sun, snow gathered around mossy stones. It was no longer just a well. It was a sealed door. That night, over dinner, Elena put down her chopsticks and looked Gregorio in the eye. "Did you know someone named Rosa María Quiñones?" Gregorio didn't answer immediately. He looked up from his newspaper, his eyes frozen. "No," he said. "And don't ever say that name in this house again." "Not who?" "Not why do you ask?" Just flat denial, the kind used by people who buried something too deep, for too long. Elena didn't sleep. She went into Benjamin's room, tucked him in, and sat beside him. He stirred, smiling faintly in his sleep, a rare smile. She kissed his forehead and whispered. "What else did she say, sweetheart?" Benjamin murmured. She said, "It's almost time. The truth will bloom like flowers, after the frost." It sounded like poetry. But to Elena, it planted a seed of fear and hope all at once. She looked out the window. The wind stirred the bare trees. And the well, still silent, was whispering to her. In the voiceless language of forgotten souls. In the days that followed, a heavy weight settled over the house. Gregorio spoke even less. But it wasn't remorse, it was more like he was holding the seams of the world together, trying to keep it from unraveling. Elena, meanwhile, began to notice and hear things she had once ignored. The soft footsteps of Benjamin moving toward the back door in the early mornings. The howl of the wind slipping through the cracks whenever he drew. And the names whispered in her mind whenever her fingers brushed against the old photo: Rosa María Quiñones. The silence in the house no longer felt peaceful. It was thick like cotton packed down her throat, like a veil pulled over the truth. Then one night, Benjamin drew again. He sat at his little desk, hand gliding across paper. Elena stepped in quietly. This time, the drawing was different. The woman in the picture was no longer looking up. Her eyes were closed, yet a soft smile lingered on her face. Around her neck was a heart-shaped necklace, a detail that had never appeared before. Not imagination. A memory. How do you know she wore that necklace? Elena asked, heart pounding. Benjamin looked up. I remember, he whispered. When she hugged me, her necklace always touched my cheek. It was cold, but smelled like dried flowers. Elena stood still. No one had told him that. No one had ever said a word. Unless he had been there. She sat down, clutching the drawing. For the first time in her life, she didn't try to dismiss it. Your mother's name was Rosa María. The word slipped out like a spring breeze, but strong enough to blow away 2 decades of buried dust. After Benjamin's whisper echoed in Elena's mind, she couldn't close her eyes all night. She saw Rosa Maria's face, not the one from the faded photo but the one from Benjamin's drawings. Every time she shut her eyes, she saw those eyes, wide, full of unsaid things, silently asking, "Why did you stay silent?" The next morning, after Gregorio left for work, Elena did something she hadn't dared in 15 years. She took the photograph of Rosa María and walked into the garden toward the well. The winter wind hissed through the dry trees, clawing at her neck like a warning. The well sat motionless, like a grave. Moss blanketed the concrete lid. Water stains ringed its edge. She knelt beside it, placing the photo gently on the icy stone. "Rosa María," she whispered. "If you're still here, if you haven't found peace, please, give me a sign." No voice answered. Only the wind. But this time, it wasn't cold. It warmed just slightly, like someone had passed by her back, carrying a trace of lavender on the breeze. Elena turned. No one. But something in her stirred. Later that day, while cleaning out an old linen cabinet, Elena discovered something she'd never noticed before. A small, rusted tin box wedged between folded towels, its paint flaking off. Inside, a heart-shaped necklace. Tarnished silver, but still faintly scented with lavender. Exactly like the one in Benjamin's drawing. Elena collapsed to her knees. Her hands trembled as she held it. It felt like she had just opened a door she had spent her entire life avoiding. That night, without saying a word, she placed the necklace in Benjamin's hand as he slept. The boy turned in his dream, smiling softly. His fingers curled around it like he was reclaiming something that had always belonged to him. The next morning, Benjamin didn't ask. Didn't seem surprised. He simply said, "She wore it every time she sang me to sleep." She said, it carried a second heartbeat. Elena turned away, tears slipping down her face before she realized they'd come. Her heart screamed. Why didn't I see? Why didn't I ask? Why didn't I protect this child from a silence that lasted too long? That evening, during dinner, Elena looked at Gregorio. He was still composed. Still slicing his meat with familiar motions. still pouring wine like nothing outside that room had changed. "Did you love Rosa Maria?" she asked, her voice calm like autumn wind, but sharp as glass. Gregorio paused. Just for a second. But it was enough. "She was a maid," he replied. "You were the one I married." "Elena didn't leave," she added. "You left her." Gregorio set his wine glass down slowly. "Some people shouldn't be mothers." "But she was pregnant with your child," Elena said, voice cracking. "That child is Benjamin." Gregorio didn't deny it. Didn't nod. Just silence. But now, silence was the clearest confession. That night, Elena opened the window. Cold wind rushed into the room, stirring the curtains. She sat by Benjamin's bed, gently stroking his golden hair like a small flame in winter darkness. "Are you afraid?" she asked. Benjamin shook his head slightly. "No. Because my real mom is always nearby. People just don't listen." Elena squeezed his hand and whispered, "I hear her now. And I promise, I won't stay silent anymore." That night, she didn't just keep watch over the boy. She kept watch over the truth finally clawing its way out of a house that had buried it for far too long. Outside, the wind blew again. And the well for the first time in 20 years let out a faint sound, thin and brittle, like a sigh. After that night, Elena was no longer the woman Gregorio once knew. She no longer folded towels neatly. She didn't water the plants on time. She didn't stay silent when interrupted. And most of all, she began quietly gathering the fragments of a woman the world had erased as if she had never existed. She went to the Richfield town library where dusty silence hung like a veil over every page. She didn't use Gregorio's last name. She used her maiden name as if stepping out from the shadow that had smothered her for 2 decades. There, she found her first piece of truth. Rosa María Quiñones. Made at the home of Gregorio Lane. Disappeared May 1999. No goodbye. No bank activity. No forwarding address. Just vanished. And on the faded copy of her employment record, something struck Elena cold. That same year, Gregorio had filed 2 weeks of sudden leave for urgent work travel, exactly matching the time Rosa Maria disappeared. It felt like needles up her spine. No more doubt. No more uncertainty. Gregorio knew what happened. And all this time, his silence wasn't forgetfulness. It was erasure by design. That night, Elena didn't join Gregorio for dinner. She sat in Benjamin's room instead, listening to him share stories that once seemed outlandish. Now, they were too real. She said, "Every truth begins with a question people don't want to answer," Benjamin said, his eyes watching the wind dance outside the window. "Elena," Gregorio called softly from downstairs, his voice unusually gentle. "Are you all right?" She looked at the heart-shaped necklace resting in Benjamin's hand. "I'm fine," she replied. But Gregorio knew. That was the first time she ever lied to him. The next day, Elena visited the only person she could trust. Hector Whitmore, a retired attorney now living alone in a stone cottage north of town, where the wind chimes only rang for those truly alone. "My son talks to the wind," Elena began, her eyes heavy with doubt. "And the wind answers with secrets I've denied too long." Hector didn't laugh. Not like the others who mocked what they didn't understand. "That boy has the memory of an old soul," he said. "And old souls don't lie. They're just forced into silence." Hector searched his memory. The name Rosa María Quiñones wasn't unfamiliar. He remembered the whispers. A maid who vanished. No search party. No obituary. No funeral. No mourning. She existed, he sighed. But Richfield chose to forget her. Just like it's forgotten many women. When they no longer fit the town's tidy sense of morality. Elena looked at him. I need the truth. Not just for me. But for my son. Hector nodded. In his eyes was a kind of light you only see in those who've lost deeply. A silent understanding. Because he too had once lost a daughter. Forgotten by the very world he once believed was just. When Elena returned from Hector's house, she said nothing to Gregorio. But Gregorio knew. He looked at her as if he could sense something had shifted. Something irreversible. He set his teacup down, eyes calm. You're digging up what should have been left buried. Elena turned away, her hand clutching the necklace in her coat pocket. She replied, steady. You buried her alive. I'm just bringing her back into the light. Gregorio sighed, not with anger, not with denial. But something inside him cracked. I gave him a home. A name. A chance, he said, voice firm as always. You didn't give, Elena interrupted. You stole. You stole memory. Identity. And silence that might have been sacred, had it not been used to bury a sin. That night, Elena dreamed of Rosa María. She wasn't in the well. She stood in the garden, among withered flowers, arms raised as if longing to be held once more. The heart-shaped necklace still hung from her neck. And in the wind, a whisper. I'm still waiting. But I'm no longer waiting alone. When Elena woke, she knew what she had to do. No more delay. No more fear. She would open the well. And she would call Rosa María's name with the soul of a mother. That morning, the wind didn't blow. The sun didn't shine. The town seemed to hold its breath before a tremor no one saw coming. Elena held the formal request for excavation and walked straight to the town committee office, eyes like someone who had lost too much to be afraid anymore. The young clerk on duty trembled as she took the paper. She read the name, Elena Lane. And the address, 218 Orchard Lane. Her fingers hesitated on one line. Request to exhume concrete structure behind residence, possible connection to missing person case, 1999. Her eyes widened. But Elena just offered a faint smile. Don't worry. The well doesn't just hold water. It holds memory. That afternoon, as if drawn by an invisible thread, Benjamin wandered into the town library, the old refuge for sensitive children misunderstood by grown ups. In the farthest corner, where the light from the window spilled into a narrow golden beam like a stairway to the forgotten, an old man waited. Hector Whitmore. Bent back. Silver hair. But his eyes, they had never aged. He sat silently beside a wall of dusty books, holding a copy of a public record, something it took 3 people to help him find. You remember your mother, don't you? Hector asked, as if he were asking himself. Benjamin nodded, not with his head, but with his eyes. I don't remember her voice. But I remember how she held my hand when it was cold, he whispered. She smelled like rain after a storm. Hector nodded thoughtfully, placing his hand on an open book. The persistence of memory. The first line on the page was bold. What is forgotten never truly disappears. It only waits for someone brave enough to speak it again. Are you ready? Hector asked. Benjamin looked up. I was born to remember for her. That night, Elena and Hector met again in the dark. Not to seek the truth but to protect it? They had filed the request. They had begun the journey. But they both knew, Gregorio would not stay silent for long. He'll fight this, Hector warned. He's not used to being unmasked. Elena looked out the window. The wind stirred the bare trees in the yard. He was once someone I trusted, she said softly. My refuge from infertility. From the fear of never becoming a mother. But maybe, he was never a refuge. Just a locked room with no air. Then let's open the door, Hector replied. Not for him. For her. Just as Elena predicted, Gregorio erupted when he found out. He stormed into the town office with a briefcase full of documents, accusing his wife of mental instability. He cited post-miscarriage depression and claimed she was influenced by delusional dreams. But the man assigned to his case knew a quiet clerk whose mother, Florencia, had once lived next to Elena. She was the one who had heard Rosa Maria cry the night she disappeared. The permit is signed, he said calmly. Town policy requires reopening cases when new evidence and testimony emerge. This isn't about family. It's about justice. Gregorio left without another word. But when he turned back, for the first time in years, his eyes betrayed doubt. That same night, Elena went down to the laundry room where Gregorio once kept the key to the old oak drawer. She opened it, and beneath the usual gray-blue ties, she found a small velvet box. Inside, a folded paper yellowed with age, corners frayed. An unsent letter, written in a familiar slanted hand. Gregorio, I don't know what will happen. But I hope, if you ever see our child, you'll tell them about me. I don't want to disappear like a mistake. I loved. And that is never wrong. Rosa Maria. Elena didn't cry. But she placed the letter in her coat pocket. Evidence of something she hadn't dared to face. That woman had once lived. And once loved. And she, Elena, had once stayed silent. But not anymore. From the doorway, Benjamin stood watching, necklace in hand, eyes fixed on the well. Moonlight spilled over the pale concrete. And for the first time, he heard the wind sing. Not in words. In melody. The same lullaby he'd heard in dreams. Before he could speak. A lullaby with no lyrics. Just rhythm. Like a heartbeat in the dark. And he smiled. I'm almost there, Mom, he whispered. You won't be buried much longer. Tuesday. The morning began with a pale envelope delivered directly to Elena, stamped with the red seal of the Connecticut County Court. She didn't open it immediately. She already knew what was inside. Authorization to exhume the well behind 218 Orchard Lane. Her hands trembled not from fear, but because the truth had been sealed beneath cold concrete for so long. And now, she was the one with the courage to knock. Outside, the air wasn't cold, but the backyard felt like it exhaled frost. The well stood silently. Still. But Elena knew deep down, it wasn't just earth and stone. It was a mother. Waiting 20 years. To be called by name. Rumors spread faster than wind. In Richfield, where no one says anything outright. But everything is known. The story of the well traveled like smoke. People whispered in bakeries, gas stations, and even in line at the library. Is this about that maid who disappeared? I heard the adopted boy drew hundreds of pictures of a woman in a well. And Mrs. Elena's husband, quiet man, works in banking. But all those words like the wind never reached the storm's eye. Because the center was Benjamin. The day the permit was approved, Benjamin didn't go to school. He sat in his room, flipping through worn sheets of paper. His old drawings from when he was 5. Stone circles, reaching arms, loose hair, dim light from above. He didn't remember drawing them. But each image felt like a severed limb rejoining a soul. Outside his door, Elena stood quietly, watching her son. This boy, once thought to be troubled, was now the lantern, leading a forgotten spirit home. "Elena," a voice called behind her. "Gregorio." She didn't turn. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly. Gregorio sighed, standing behind her. "Elena, what you're doing, it's going to destroy everything." She turned around, eyes clear. "What's being destroyed," she said, "is the illusion you built to hide your guilt. I gave the boy a home. A name." He repeated the old line. "But you never gave him memory. And memory, Gregorio, that's what keeps a person alive." Gregorio said nothing. But this time, he stepped back. That afternoon, Hector arrived with Marco Reyes, the court's records officer. They carried the reprinted birth certificate, missing persons report for Rosa Maria, and one rare photograph. Rosa Maria in a kitchen, hand resting on her pregnant belly. And in the background, Gregorio, his face blurred, watching through the glass. When Elena saw it, she cried. Not because she recognized someone, but because of the smile on Rosa Maria's face. It wasn't a sad smile. It was the smile of a mother in love. Hopeful. Believing she would be allowed to live and hold on. But no one held on to her. At last, the excavation crew arrived. Men in gray uniforms, protective goggles, stepping out of trucks. No one said much. They just got to work, measuring, marking, laying tarps. Then, the drill hit the old concrete. The sound boomed like thunder in the still afternoon. Benjamin stood beside Elena, clutching the heart-shaped necklace Rosa Maria once wore. His hand was pale, fingers tight. A worker shouted, "There's something soft down here." Everyone froze. Hector stepped forward. Elena clutched her son's hand, trembling. Marco pulled back the windscreen tarp. A faint sound like the pop of a lid opening escaped as they peeled back the final layer of clay. And then, they saw the dress. Still green. Still that sea glass shade. Faded. Torn. Covered in earth. But the color remained. And inside, a frail body, curled inward. Arms wrapped around something. A photograph. Though blurred, one could still see. A newborn child. Benjamin sat down on the ground. No one told him what to do. But he simply spoke, not to anyone but as if speaking to the wind. "Mom never let go of me." Elena stood behind him, tears falling in silence. But in her heart, something had finally been set back in its rightful place. The well, once a grave for memory, had become a gateway for resurrection. Because truth, no matter how deeply buried, always knows how to rise, like flowers pushing through stone and soil. That night, rain fell. Not a furious downpour meant to wash away sins, but a soft, steady rain. A long lullaby of silence. As if the sky, too, was mourning something it had allowed to be buried for 2 decades. Elena sat alone in the kitchen, before her the reliquario, the heart-shaped pendant that once lay around Rosa Maria's neck, now resting gently on a white cloth. Under the warm light, it shimmered like a frozen tear. Benjamin slept on the sofa, still holding the photo found with his mother's body. A worn image of himself as an infant in Rosa's arms. On his face was a piece that pierced the heart. Not because he had found her, but because she had never truly left. The next day, Gregorio Lane was arrested. No noise. No handcuffs in public. Just a police car pulling up to the house. 2 officers stepping out. A warrant read aloud. And Gregorio walking calmly into the vehicle. His expression unchanged, like he was heading to another day at the bank. Elena watched him go. She felt no anger. Only a quiet void. The kind left behind when a part of your memory is cut away. Not because you wanted to forget, but because some things died long ago. And today was the first time they were buried properly. The Richfield Town Court opened its hearing on an early spring morning, when wildflowers had just begun pushing through the thawing snow. The courtroom was packed. Some came out of curiosity, some from guilt, and some simply because they had once heard a woman singing in the wind, and had been too afraid to believe it. Hector Whitmore was the first to testify. He spoke of Benjamin's drawings of the woman with no mouth, of the lullabies heard only in silence, of the well that had been sealed without anyone asking why. His voice was low, trembling, but every word landed like a hammer on stone. That boy didn't remember with his mind, he said. He remembered with his soul. And I believe, some truths are written in blood, not ink. Even when buried, they rise like flowers through ice. Marco Reyes, the records officer, presented forged documents. Gregorio's sudden leave of absence on the day Rosa disappeared. An adoption file signed by a social worker who had retired 2 years earlier. And finally, Benjamin took the witness stand. The courtroom held its breath. He stood there. Not a boy, but the voice of someone who had been denied their own name. He held the necklace still warm from the hands of the mother who had once cradled him in the dark. I don't remember everything, he began. I don't remember her voice. Don't remember the old house. Don't remember whose hands once tucked me in. He paused. His eyes met Gregorio's. The man who had raised him. And the man who had stolen his truth through ruthless silence. But I remember the feeling, he said, voice steady. The cold. The loneliness. Like I had been left in a world that forgot my name. Until I started drawing. He lifted one of his sketches. The woman in the green dress. Light from above. Eyes closed. Mouth still. But this time, her arms weren't raised in desperation. They were open. Like she was holding the entire world. Elena taught me how to listen, he finished. And then, I heard her. Not a voice, but a breath. A memory. A love that never went away. The room was silent. No applause. But no one left without tears. At the end of the hearing, as they stepped outside, sunlight began to warm the sidewalk. Elena held Benjamin's hand without a word. In her heart, all the regrets she once carried seemed to melt away. Not in forgetting, but in the light shining from this child's eyes. He hadn't sought revenge. He hadn't cursed. He simply remembered. And by remembering, he had saved his mother from being forgotten. That evening, in a house now missing half its soul, Elena sat by the kitchen window. She opened her small leather journal, turned to a blank page, and wrote the first line in 20 years. Rosa Maria, can you hear me? The wind has begun to sing again. She closed the notebook, placed it beside the rosemary vase, and blew out the candle. Not to extinguish the flame, but to let the light begin somewhere else. Spring in Richfield was never much. No festivals, no fireworks, no crowds flooding the streets. But that year, something changed. Not because of what was said, but because of what had never been said. Finally whispered into the wind. In the western corner of the library, where late afternoon light spilled diagonally through a dusty window, a quiet reading nook was built. No ribbon cutting, no flashy sign, just a framed photograph on the wall. Rosa María Quiñones, eyes wide, a soft smile, clutching a book to her chest like it was the holiest thing she had ever held. Below it, a small wooden plaque. Rosa María Reading Room, for the stories almost forgotten. No one asked who named it, but everyone understood. Benjamin didn't return to school immediately. He asked for 2 weeks. To be with Mom. Not Elena, but Rosa María, the mother he had held only once. In crumbling arms, beneath the earth. Each morning, he sat in the garden, beside the well that had been filled. On the ground lay a ring of white stones, laid carefully by his and Elena's hands. In the center, a rosemary bush. The herb Rosa once used to cook, to soften her hair, to keep the scent of motherhood in the night air when her arms were empty. There, Benjamin wrote letters to his mother. Not to send, but to leave on the rosemary, for the wind to carry. Mom, I missed you today. I reread what you wrote for me before I could read. Warmth, the scent of your hair, the lullaby with no words. I'll tell others about you. Not as a ghost, but as a woman who lived, who loved, and who was silenced. But not anymore. Elena began writing, too. A new habit from an old heart. Each morning, she penned one short note in the leather journal by the window. Today, I saw a sparrow on the well. It looked at me, then flew away. I think it was you. I should have asked if you were hungry. When you worked in my kitchen, I only noticed the salt, never asked what dish was your favorite. I let my husband kill your voice. But today, I planted lavender. For you. And for every woman I ever ignored. Each page, she folded in half, placing it in a wooden box beneath the rosemary, with dried petals and a few stones from around the well. No one else read them. But perhaps the wind did. One afternoon, as Elena folded a dish towel, the doorbell rang. She opened the door to find a woman. Early 40s, slim, in a faded denim jacket, holding an old, water-stained photograph. Clarissa. Elena recognized her immediately. The summer boarder from years ago. The girl who'd seen Rosa María crying in the hallway. And turned away, thinking, it's not my place. I found this photo while clearing out my old room, Clarissa said, handing it over. In it, Rosa María beamed beside a weathered hammock, holding a glass of iced water, hair wild in the sun. I didn't bring it to court, because I was scared, Clarissa said. But now, I don't want to keep it hidden anymore. Elena took the photo, hands trembling. Once again, a piece of memory found its way home. She may have already forgiven you, Elena whispered. Clarissa nodded, tears brimming. But I want to say it to her myself. The two women walked out to the garden. They sat together beside the rosemary bush. Clarissa placed the photo in a small wooden frame, then laid down a dried lavender sprig inside the circle of white stones. No words were spoken. But this time, the silence wasn't to hide anything. It was to remember. That night, Benjamin and Elena ate dinner in silence. But it was a different kind of silence. The kind where two hearts truly listen to one another. After the meal, Benjamin got up, opened the drawer, and pulled out his notebook. The journal he was writing for his mother. On that day's page, he had written, "I miss you every time the wind moves the curtains. If I sing softly enough, will you ever sing back?" He closed the notebook and smiled. In his heart, Rosa Maria was beginning to speak again. Not through sound, but through being named. That summer arrived earlier than usual. The rosemary plants behind the Lane house had taken root, blooming into tiny purple-blue flowers. Not brilliant, but steadfast. In soil once buried beneath concrete, life quietly bloomed, as if Rosa Maria's soul were returning leaf by leaf. Elena placed a bench beside the plants. Each morning, she sat with her herbal tea, reading the letters Benjamin had written to his mother. Sometimes just a sentence, sometimes pages of tears. She never interrupted. She only listened, like a guardian of an old world slowly being opened. Hector Whitmore, after the trial, became a fixture in the Lane home. He often visited in the late afternoons, carrying cookies or old books. "I used to believe justice lived in the courtroom," he once said while sitting with Elena on the bench. "But now I know, it begins when we dare to name the forgotten." Elena smiled. "And I waited 20 years to learn how to say her name without pain." They didn't need to say more, because the wind had already said it for them. Benjamin was no longer the boy with cloudy eyes, uncertain of his roots. He began documenting the entire story. Not for publishing, but to ensure that a woman named Rosa María Quiñones would never be hidden again. In a soft blue notebook, he wrote the first line by hand. "This story is my mother's, but it's also mine, and of every child ever forced to stay silent before learning how to speak." The pages that followed weren't just memories. They were breath. A small hand reaching up from the bottom of a well. Not for rescue, but to touch life. A month later, the first person to knock on the Whitmore house door was a young woman carrying a suitcase and a letter of introduction. On her face was the silent fear of someone used to being overlooked. Hector welcomed her with a nod. Elena smiled and handed her a cup of tea. The second was a single mother with 2 children. Then a teenager who had been denied the right to live authentically. An elderly woman returned after leaving a 30-year nameless marriage. They did not come to be pitied. They came to be heard and believed. Benjamin dedicated an entire small room in the house as a space for recording the stories of those who had never thought their voices were worthy of being remembered. He didn't interview them. He simply sat, poured water, nodded and pressed record. "I learned this from my mother," he told Elena. "Not my birth mother, but my adoptive one. You taught me that some silences don't need to be broken with shouting. Just with a hand that knows how to hold." Elena choked up. In the eyes of the woman who once silently watched her husband seal a well, there was now the light of someone who understood what it meant to atone not with words, but with action. One day, a package arrived at the Whitmore house. No sender, no return address, only a handwritten note. "I was once a clerk at the town law office. I followed instructions and destroyed part of Rosa Maria's file. I'm sorry. Here's what I remember. Inside was a typed list: names, dates, addresses and an unsent letter. Once part of a resignation form Rosa Maria had been forced to sign. She didn't resign. She was forced out. Benjamin read it, folded it, and placed it carefully into the memory box. The wooden box that held all that once belonged to his mother. The photograph, the necklace, the letter. And now, the truth. Not justice, he said. But the first sound after a long sleep of silence. That night, as Elena stepped into the garden, she saw a candle flickering inside the circle of white stones. Benjamin was sitting there, silent, reading aloud from his notebook. "Mom, today, 3 people said your name during our group meeting. One of them didn't even know who you were. But they still said, Rosa Maria." He looked up toward the sky, the wind brushing gently through his hair. "They say when someone's name is still spoken, they haven't truly left." Elena held his hand. "And your mother," she whispered, "will stay, for a long, long time." Since the Whitmore house became a refuge for voices once pushed aside, a new kind of air began to circulate through Richfield. No one announced it. No signs were hung. No ceremonies held. But people began sitting closer together in silence. At the flower shop on Main Street, Mr. Henry, once the only person in town who grew rosemary for something other than decoration, started adding a rosemary sprig to every bouquet. For funerals. For birthdays. Even just because the day was beautiful. For those who waited to be named, he would say to customers, bowing his head. No one asked questions. But that night, many customers went home and quietly wrote down an old name in a long-forgotten journal. At the Whitmore house, a new space was built behind the kitchen. The memory recording room. Not large, just big enough for a tea table, 2 chairs, and an old recorder in the center. But there, those who had stayed silent their whole lives began whispering with their own voices. Some cried. Some couldn't speak at all. But as Benjamin said, silence doesn't need to be broken with a scream. Just with someone willing to sit beside it. He sat next to every story. No commentary. No attempt to heal. Just presence. The same presence he had once wished for his mother. One early June afternoon, Rosita, Benjamin, and Julia's adopted daughter asked, "Daddy, why did you name me Rosita?" Benjamin looked at her. Her deep brown eyes, long braid over her shoulder. Voice clear as morning wind. He had prepared this answer for years. But when the question finally arrived, his heart trembled like it did the first time he stood by the well. "You were named after someone very brave," he said. "Someone who used to sing in the wind, but no one listened. Someone who was buried, but still held her child with all the love in the world. Someone who was never called by her real name. Until I learned how to listen." Rosita lowered her head and whispered, "I'll sing for her." That sentence, as small as a raindrop, fell into Benjamin's heart like a promise renewed. The next day, Rosita carried a small bouquet. Lavender, rosemary, and white daisies. And laid it before the stone circle where the well once stood. She stood silently. Then pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket. "Dear Rosa Maria. I'm Rosita. I know I've never met you. But every time I read, every time I sing, every time I plant flowers, I think of you. And I say your name in my head. It's like lighting a candle in the dark. And I think, you can see that light, can't you?" Elena, watching from a distance, began to cry. Not from pain, but because she had just witnessed life blooming from death in the most beautiful way, through memory and love. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Benjamin wrote a letter to his mother. Blank paper, purple ink, slanted handwriting like wind across a page. Mom, today Rosita said your name. Not to tell a sad story, but to tell a story where you were the one who planted the seed. Now, the tree is growing. The flowers are blooming. And the wind is still singing. You are no longer forgotten. He folded the letter, placed it beside Rosa Maria's photo on the desk. In the photo, she still had those smiling eyes. Loose hair draped over her shoulders. Arms cradling a newborn. Outside the window, the rosemary branches swayed. The wind wasn't strong, but it was enough. Enough to carry unspoken words far, far away. And if you listened long enough, you might hear something that sounds like a lullaby, softly hummed in the dark. Have you ever noticed that the deepest truths in life often begin with a very small question? One late summer morning, as the sun was still rising, Rosita ran to Elena, who was watering flowers. A notebook clutched in her arms, filled with scribbles and drawings. "Grandma," she asked, "if someone's no longer alive, but you talk to them every day, do they still hear you?" Elena froze. For a moment, light reflected off the drops of water, like sighs from the rosemary blooms. She looked at her granddaughter. Those eyes. They were Benjamin's all over again. The same eyes that once stared into nothingness and asked, "Is my mom in the well?" Elena knelt, smiling gently. "If you believe enough, if you love enough, they never leave. They just change the way they stay." Rosita nodded, then opened her notebook and pointed to a drawing. A woman with long hair, a blue dress, standing in a flower garden. Birds in the sky, grass beneath her feet. No face, no name, but light surrounded her. "I drew her," Rosita said. "Ms. Rosa Maria. I've never seen her, but I know she's smiling." Elena held her hand. One frail, weathered hand marked by time. One soft, small hand bursting with life. And in that moment, two generations. One who once buried the truth, and one born to uncover it, were united by the same belief. Memory is a kind of light, and life continues when we remember it rightly. Hector Whitmore, now frail, often sat reading under the porch of the Whitmore house. A place where he once wept for his daughter Amalia, lost to an accident years ago. But now, he was no longer alone in grief. He had become the gatekeeper for lost souls, finding their way back. One afternoon, Benjamin sat beside him, handing him a small box. "I want you to have this," he said. Inside, copies of Benjamin's earliest drawings. The woman in the well, the green dress, the stone circles, the mouthless eyes. And over time, those drawings evolved. She gained a mouth, a smile, and finally, light. Hector touched each page in silence. His eyes welled up. "You gave your mother a face again," he whispered. "Not just my mother," Benjamin said, staring into the distance, "but everyone who was never named. Every story never told." Hector nodded. "And maybe, one day, we won't need a house to heal in. because the whole town will know how to listen. Meanwhile, Elena quietly undertook one final act. She wrote handwritten letters to those who once knew, or once chose not to know. Rosa Maria, the preschool teacher, the hairdresser, even the old pastor who once refused to hold a funeral for lack of documentation. She didn't write to accuse or to reopen wounds. She wrote just one line. I simply want you to know. Rosa María Quiñones once lived. And now, we say her name every morning. If you remember anything about her, please say it. Please share it. It doesn't have to be beautiful. Just true. A week later, replies began to arrive. One read. I used to hear her sing while hanging laundry. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was warm. I'm sorry, I thought her pain wasn't my business. Another. My son went to preschool with her child. He once told me she was crying. But I told him, don't look at people when they're weak. Now I wish I had taught him differently. No one signed their names. But it didn't matter. What mattered was, they wrote, they remembered, and they opened the door for truth to enter. One Sunday morning, the whole family gathered beneath the tree beside the stone circle. Rosita brought a white cloth painted and colored by the storytelling group's children. On it, scrawled in imperfect handwriting, Ella importa. She matters. Benjamin hung the cloth from a branch. It swayed softly in the breeze, like the laughter of someone once forgotten, but never extinguished. And then, as if by some beautiful coincidence, a small sparrow landed inside the stone ring. Rosita gasped. She came. She saw it. No one corrected her. No one explained. Because some beliefs need no proof. Only a heart clear enough, a memory deep enough, and a generation willing to keep calling the name. Richfield began to shift seasons. Not in weather, but in spirit. It became a season of listening. People interrupted each other less in the market. Some churches started reading names of the forgotten before every service. And in Ms. Clara's classroom, a new weekly lesson was added. Memory from those without a page in history. One day, Rosita stood before her class, holding Rosa Maria's photo. She didn't give a speech. She didn't cry. She simply said, "This is the grandmother the world once tried to forget. But we remember her." No one laughed. One child in the back raised their hand and asked quietly, "Can we paint her on the school wall?" Not because she died, but because she loved. A week later, the first mural was completed. On the back wall of the Richfield Library. Once blank, once silent. A woman in a sea green dress now stood. Hair blowing in the wind. Arms wide open. Not in desperation, but to embrace the sky. Beneath the painting, Rosa María Quiñones, 1972 to 1999. No longer buried. No longer silenced. No ribbon was cut. No speeches made. But people walking by stopped. Some left flowers. Some touched the wall. Some finally whispered a name they had held in silence for years. Inside the Whitmore house, Benjamin hosted a small gathering. Not to commemorate death, but to celebrate the day Rosa Maria was first called by her name with love, not fear. There was cake. There was tea. There was a radio playing an instrumental piece composed by local teenagers, titled Lullaby by the Well. Elena, sitting by the window, gently brushed aside her silver hair. She didn't speak much anymore. But in her eyes, after years of hiding behind duty, silence, and compromise, there was now a smile free of guilt. Hector brought a special gift. A limited edition book, bound in soft lilac cloth. Its title handwritten on the cover. My name is Rosa Maria, and I once lived. It wasn't a novel. Not a memoir. But a collection of Benjamin's letters to his mother over 20 years. Interspersed with apologies from others. Children's drawings. Testimonies from those who once stood silent when harm was done. A map of memory written in love. And printed in the ink of awakening. Only 99 copies were made. Symbolic of the last year Rosa Maria lived. The first copy was placed on the reading table of the Richfield Library. The last on her grave. That night, after the guests had left, Rosita quietly walked into the garden. In her hand, an envelope. Inside, a small letter written in purple ink. Childlike handwriting, but steady. Dear Rosa, I promise to tell your story to those who've never heard it. Not to make them cry, but to help them love better. I'll be the voice you once lacked. The song you were never allowed to sing. And if one day the wind stops blowing, I'll be the one to start the song. She buried the letter beneath the rosemary bush. The same spot where Gregorio once poured cement over the well. No one said a word. But just then, a breeze swept through. Light, gentle, and filled with the scent of lavender. Benjamin stepped outside and saw his daughter sitting, knees tucked, staring at the sky. You're not sad, are you? He asked. Rosita shook her head. No, I feel like she's everywhere now. Then she turned to him and asked, Daddy, is it possible to tell the same story over and over, but still make it feel new each time? Benjamin smiled, eyes glistening. If the story is true, it never gets old. And in the distance, in the corner of the garden, moonlight filtered through the rosemary leaves, falling upon a small stone engraved with the words, She didn't die. She was just waiting to be named. The first winter after Rosa Maria's remembrance came gently, like an exhale at the end of the day. No biting cold. No heavy snow. Just layers of silver frost covering the rosemary. The stone bench in the garden. And the white pebbles that once encircled the buried well of memories. Elena, now nearly 90, still rose every morning to write one line in her leather notebook. Though her hands trembled, though her eyes blurred. But she no longer wrote for herself. She wrote for those who never got the chance to speak. Or who were told not to. That morning, she wrote. Today, Rosita sang a lullaby with no words. But I heard your name in it, Rosa Maria. You are no longer a wound. You are a song. Benjamin, now 40, no longer drew stone circles. No longer repeated melodies only he could hear. Now, he taught memory writing to children who had grown up in silence. He didn't teach literature. He didn't push emotion. He simply asked, if you could say one thing to someone who's no longer here, what would it be? One child wrote, I forgive you. Another, I remember how you held me tight, even when you didn't say anything. Benjamin looked at their words and understood. When memory is written the right way, it doesn't hurt. It heals. Rosita, now 13, became a volunteer at the Whitmore House. She didn't do big things. She simply poured tea for newcomers, organized letters, and listened. One day, An elderly woman fresh from ending a 35-year silent marriage sat across from her, sobbing like a child. Rosita said nothing. She simply took the woman's hand and placed a small note in her palm. Did you know? Just saying your name might be enough to begin again. Hector Whitmore, the old companion, passed away in his sleep on a January night without wind. When he was found, his hand held a photo of his daughter, Amalia, with one handwritten line. "Dad, I think Rosa Maria has forgiven both of us." The Whitmore house was turned over to a community council, not to manage it, but to preserve it as a space of memory and healing. A wooden plaque now hangs by the door, etched with Hector's words. "Silence can kill, but listening can resurrect." On the 5th anniversary of the well's exhumation, Richfield held a ceremony. No speeches, no music, just a long white table where townsfolk placed names of those they had once been afraid to say aloud. Single mothers, disabled sisters, old friends who took their own lives, wives who were abused, fathers who left in silence. Benjamin placed Rosa Maria's name first. Rosita placed one beside it. Elena, the one who learned how to speak again. At the end of the ceremony, everyone held a sprig of rosemary and walked together into the garden, toward the circle of white stones. They sang, not with words, not in harmony, but a long, soft hum, like a lullaby carried by the wind. No one called it a sad story anymore. Now, it was a legacy, a light, a name held by an entire community. That night, Benjamin and Rosita sat on the porch, a gentle breeze dancing past them. In his hands, Elena's leather notebook. She had passed away a few weeks earlier, leaving only one final line. "My son has learned to listen, and my granddaughter has learned to sing again. I can fly in peace now, Rosa Maria." Benjamin closed his eyes and nodded. He didn't cry, because no one truly leaves if we call their name every day with love. Rosita sat beside him, looking up at the stars. "Daddy," she whispered, "can I keep writing this story?" Benjamin turned to her, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, and said softly, "You don't have to write it, love. You just have to live it. With all the names the world once tried to forget. And you'll carry them by how you live." On the white gravestone of Rosa María Quiñones, someone had etched a new line. Not as an ending, but as a beginning. She was once forgotten. Now, she is part of the light. The story ends here. But memory, it keeps singing, like wind through the trees. Thank you for joining us. We'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and share. What did this story teach you? How might it shape the way you live or forgive? Your voice matters. Reading your reflections brings strength, healing, and inspiration to us all. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us create more stories that awaken the soul. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.